Awesome. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I see folks are coming in. Thank you for joining Silence the Shame's community conversation for March. We are opening up the space now to start up the panel discussion. So we are excited for you all to be joining us tonight. Tonight, we will be talking about the unseen eating disorders in the Black community. My name is Megan Sharjoy Pringle. I am the Director of Programs for Silence the Shame. Definitely just want to welcome everyone into this space, create a safe space for everyone who's here, especially since we are talking about a sensitive topic tonight. So we will introduce you to tonight's moderator and to the panelists. But first, I just want to provide you some housekeeping rules. You all are muted throughout this event. If you're joining us on Zoom, of course, you might be joining us from Facebook Live. And if that's the case, please feel free to share any comments or questions that you might have either in that chat function or in the comment section on Facebook. We have a team back here ready to get those questions over to the moderator and to the panelists. And we definitely just want to hear from you throughout the event. So additionally, just being mindful that we are talking about a sensitive topic tonight, we just want you to be mindful of this experience for everyone. So therefore, we just ask while you're engaging in discussion in either the Zoom chat or in the Facebook comment section, that we're just asking you to refrain from asking about specific details related to someone's lived experience. Here, we are just wanting to give an overview of really just understanding from our subject matter experts tonight and allowing them to share with you just the impact of eating disorders within the Black community and how we can better support and serve our community through this. So thank you again for joining us. I am going to turn it over to our moderator, Free the Vision.
Thank you so much, Megan. Good evening at this point. Welcome to Silence the Shame's community conversation. Whereas Megan said, we are discussing the unseen, which is eating disorders in the Black community. And as we discuss this invisibility, again, just to reiterate that we are wanting to be sensitive to the topic and those with lived experiences, but also discuss this and give some resources. I do want to read just a quick excerpt about it and when it comes to studies and what those things show. But so studies show that this severe mental illness is often under-researched, under-treated, and underrepresented and explicitly stigmatized within the Black community. For this reason, it is vital to bring awareness and discuss intentional ways to stay educated and support the silent community struggling with eating disorders. Again, I am very excited to bring this fantastic group of some with lived experiences and some clinicians that have an understanding of this topic. And so I do want to introduce Ms. Williams, Kiara Williams, and I want each of the panelists to take a moment to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, keeping it to about 2 minutes or less. And then we'll start with Kiara and then go Lisa and Diamond and go from there. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiara Williams. I am a licensed mental health counselor associate in the state of Indiana. I am also an associate professional counselor for the state of Georgia, and I am a national certified counselor. I have had experience working with eating disorders as well as other mental health illnesses and issues. I've had experience working in various treatment settings, and I have the pleasure of working with the National Alliance for Eating Disorders doing their clinician-led eating disorder support groups. And so that has just been a really great experience for me. I've been in the field for a few years now, and I am just really excited to be here and to help shed some light, as well as some education on, what eating disorders looks like from a clinician side, but also from, just my experience in working with various clients and their families and those types of things. So thank you for having me.
Lisa, you are muted currently.
Sorry about that.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Morano. I'm the development manager at the National Alliance for Eating Disorders. The Alliance is the leading national nonprofit organization that provides tangible, accessible resources for individuals experiencing eating disorders, as well as for their loved ones. Here at the Alliance, we really love to meet people where they are on their recovery journeys. So one of the services we provide, as Kiara mentioned, is our free therapist-led support groups. Currently, all of our support groups are hosted online. We have several support groups that are for individuals experiencing eating disorders. We have one for LGBTQ individuals, and we have one for friends and family and other loved ones. We also provide free referrals for care. So if you or someone you know is experiencing an eating disorder, please give us a call and we can help you find treatment. So I'm just really excited to be here to talk about eating disorders within the Black community, kind of how we got here and how we can do better moving forward. So thank you again for having me.
For sure. Thank you so much, Lisa. And to my good friend, Diamond.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Diamond. I am a director and executive producer. I have my own production company, Third and Wonder Production House, where I get to create content for and about Black women. I have experienced, or I've had, an eating disorder, or I've dealt with an eating disorder off and on for 14 years. So, but I'm in recovery now, which is a beautiful feeling. So I'm happy to be here and to share.
Yes, Diamond, thank you very much for doing that. I realized as you guys were speaking that I didn't introduce myself. My name is Free the Vision. I am a I am a vision architect, and I also am a creative director and producer of contents and experience and work marketing strategy through my company Free 3 Creative. I also work with Silence the Shame as a content consultant and also the co-host of the podcast. So that's a little bit about me. I'm excited to be able to do this with everyone here and to have seen just this organization continue to grow at such a grand scale and rapid pace. And I'm so grateful for the impact that I've seen them making since day one. So just very excited for this. But let's jump right in. I am going to read this to all of our panelists. Let me first start with Kiara, and then I'll go to this question. Can you first define the different types of eating disorders for our audience?
I can. So there are different types of eating disorders that we look at that we work with. There is anorexia nervosa, or as most people know, anorexia. There is binge eating disorder. There's bulimia nervosa. There is something called ARFID, or avoidant restrictive food disorder. There is something called OSFED, or other specified eating disorders. So there are different types of eating disorders out there in the medical field, in the mental health field. When it comes to these different disorders, again, kind of to maintain this safe space, I will use general terms. I won't go into really any specifics or anything like that. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to, again, like was mentioned earlier, reach out and we can help provide you with resources. But anorexia nervosa is what causes people to have a obsessive fear of gaining weight, which then leads to that distorted body image and difficulty maintaining a healthy body weight. There are two types of anorexia nervosa that we look at. There is restricting subtype, and then there's binge purging subtype. Again, if you have any questions about these specific things, please feel free to reach out to us. When it comes to these things, what we often look at is, is a person restricting their food intake, which is basically they're not getting the proper nutritional values, or the thing they're not eating what their body needs, as far as getting, again, that thing that their body needs so that they feel comfortable and confident and those types of things, so that their body can sustain. And then the other piece is the binging or purging. So they are maybe engaging in a excessive amount, or a increased amount, I won't say excessive, increased amount of food intake, and they are then engaging in what is called purging. So they are then getting rid of those that nutrition that they're getting, the calories, those types of things in some form of fashion. Then we have binge eating disorder. So binge eating is when there are reoccurring episodes of overeating that may happen in a rapid or short time frame. So this looks like maybe, an example I often try to give people. So again, that tangible piece is when a person may be eating a meal that's more so like a Thanksgiving size meal on a day-to-day basis. So typically people tend to overeat on Thanksgiving, or that's a holiday where it's like, normal or typical for people to overeat because that's what society says that's what we should do. But when somebody is constantly doing that, that's when we go into that conversation of, okay, are we engaging in what's called binging behaviors? Then we have something called bulimia nervosa. Bulimia nervosa is where someone has regular episodes of the binge eating. So again, consuming those large amounts of food in a short period of time with the purging behaviors. So getting rid of those calories. So those two are coupled together when it comes to bulimia nervosa. Do those kind of make sense thus far?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. All right, awesome. And then we have something called avoidant restricted food intake, or ARFID, which is someone is not meeting their nutritional body energy needs because they are refusing to eat a certain type of food, or they are avoiding a certain type of food. So usually what then happens is that their body is not getting its nutrient values. And because of that, it's not what we see with anorexia, where there's a fear of gaining weight. It's a fear of a particular type of food, or sometimes texture is something that we see with ARFID. And then the other one we have that we may see is the other specified eating disorder, which is, sometimes what we'll see in people of color or in the Black community, because, well, you don't fit the qualifications in order to have this specific eating disorder. So you fall into that other specified, which is where, I know some of the conversation that will come up tonight, like, well, how do these things slip through the cracks? Is because they fall into that other specified eating disorder.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Thank you. And it does make complete sense. And this is for all panelists. And a quote from Sonia Renee Taylor, author and founder of The Body Is Not an Apology movement. She states that from LGBTQIA bodies to fat bodies to women's bodies, we live under systems that force us to judge, devalue, and discriminate against the bodies of others. In what ways do you feel our society has altered the way people view their bodies and made people feel entitled to judge others about their bodies? So we can start with you, Lisa, and then Diamond, I'd love to hear your take.
I would love to talk about this. So I think there's so much to unpack here. First of all, we have to keep in mind that fat phobia was originated in anti-Blackness. From Black bodies to LGBTQIA bodies to fat bodies, we live under these systems in our culture that are here to oppress anyone who's different, and teaches us to judge and devaluate and discriminate against bodies of others. So because this type of judgment is so commonplace, it's so pervasive and even permeates into our medical fields, like Kiara said, so many Black folks that are experiencing these eating disorders fall in between the cracks because they don't meet the antiquated criteria for being diagnosed with eating disorders. And what does that mean? What does it matter if you can't get a diagnosis? Well, you might not be able to get insurance coverage. You might not be able to get other protections, disability, time off of work. So really, it all boils down to fatness or fat phobia originating as anti-Blackness. And we see an example of this back in 2006. There was a study that was done where clinicians were asked to read a passage about a fake client named Mary. And Mary had what clearly was disturbed eating patterns. And the researchers would manipulate the ethnicity of Mary during the study. And when Mary was depicted as a white woman, she was much more likely to be diagnosed with eating disorders. But when she was depicted as a Black woman, it was extremely rare for her to be diagnosed, even though it was the same character, the same template, the same everything. So I think that we really need to look at the institutionalized systems of oppression that exist and get in the way of Black folks accessing all types of care. But we see it even more with eating disorders. We see that mental health is already so stigmatized in our culture. And then you kind of take eating disorders. We sometimes say eating disorders are like the redheaded stepchild of mental illness. And it's important to note that eating disorders can affect anybody. They can affect anybody regardless of race, socioeconomic class, background, body shape, or size. I know before I started working with eating disorders, or I'm sure before some of you tuned in tonight, you kind of get this picture in your head of who you think has eating disorders. And that's not true. It's not just thin, white, heterosexual, upper middle class women. It can be anybody. And for Black folks that are experiencing eating disorders, it's so important that you know that you deserve the same access to care that everybody else does. And I'm so excited to hear from Diamond tonight and hear a little bit about her journey, and how folks can get connected with recovery resources.
Mhm. So
Thank you
Diamond?
so much. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That is beautiful. I think for me, I mean, beautiful, but also very unfortunate. I think for me, where I like within my sphere of influence, like what influenced like me to feel some type of way about my body, because that's where I'll speak from tonight, right? Is my experience is social media. Like it was MySpace for me. That was my first entry into social media. And I mean, high school is already about like being beautiful, being a cheerleader, being this, like she's the hot one, like all of these different judgments that I didn't experience in middle school, but in high school, it's really just, it felt like it became about looks. And then there's access now to thousands or hundreds of thousands of people across the world, right? Via social media. That's where I started to look more at myself, like, oh my goodness, what's wrong? Like, oh my goodness, how can I control how I look, right? Because I also feel like, a lot of it is about being shapely, or, it's either being thin or being shapely. And I felt like I was neither. So I had to figure out what can I do? And that's what influenced me personally.
Mhm. Kiara, would you like to weigh in on that, or?
Yeah, no, I think that that's just a great point, and just that place of, the piece of like, well, how does society say these things should look? And I think that social media is such a big impact on that, because, to Diamond's point, and to Lisa's point, what happens is that we see an image on social media and that becomes the standard. But what we know about bodies is that no one body is the same. My body is different. It doesn't matter if, we're twins, and my body is different from my twins. And so what happens though is that society says, well, like, this is the standard, this is what it should look like. And I mean, if we're going to be honest on this, on this panel, again, the fact is that society says that the standard of beauty comes from the thin, the white, the certain piece of person, but that's not what our reality is. And so then when we're on social media, when we're in, those spaces that, maybe we're underrepresented or anything like that, it creates a narrative within our minds of, well, I have to look like that in order to be accepted. I have to look like that in order to feel like I belong in this space. And then that creates, a dissonance, a discord within ourselves, because, okay, on the outside, I don't look like that. And I want to feel like she feels, or feel like they feel, or feel like he feels when he walks in a room, and we don't. And so then our minds say, okay, well, let's just change ourselves. And it's not that easy. And that's where, it creates that difficult piece of, again, that place of, like you said, society and that entitlement and wanting to be accepted. Like all these things come online and come to fruition when it comes to like just eating disorders and the development and all of these pieces.
Absolutely. Kiara, this is specifically for you. Eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any mental illness, with nearly one person dying every 52 minutes due to their illness. Didn't even know that. What are the consequences under diagnosis or untreated? Excuse me, let me go back. What are the consequences of underdiagnosed or untreated eating disorders?
Absolutely. So consequences. Think about, a lot of times I was just talking to someone the other day and they were talking about being hangry. And the fact is that when we don't properly nourish ourselves, that impacts our emotions, that impacts our cognitive ability to do our work, to take care of things at home, to engage with other people, to have relationships. And so then it's this place of, oh, you know what, I am not feeding myself properly, or I'm not, meeting my nutritional value. And the reality is again, society, doctors, unknowingly are saying, well, you should have this certain BMI, you should look this way, you are overweight, you're underweight, all these different things. And they're not coming into looking at the person. And so then when this is happening, that's why we have underdiagnoses of eating disorders, because doctors are saying, well, you should just, lose weight. You should just go on this particular thing that will help you to get into this, BMI that you're supposed to fall into. Unknowingly doing damage, because that person then has a already distorted body image. They already have a difficult relationship with their body, with food, and now this doctor is telling them to do something that's unhelpful. As well as, just untreated, again, back to Lisa's point, insurance. If the doctor's not saying that, or if the person's not going to a clinician or a dietitian or anything like that, a psychiatrist, then they're not then prescribing that, or they're not then diagnosing that, then the insurance isn't going to provide treatment, because where is this coming from? There hasn't been what's the word I'm looking for? A trail. Insurances look for trails. And so they're not saying like, okay, well, you've had this for this amount of years. And so then you should be able to, receive treatment. But then you have the opposite side of that, where it's like, oh, well, you've had this for this amount of years, so you should already be healed. And it becomes a battle with the piece of, like you said, the underdiagnosis, but then also just the untreatedness of it, because then, as well as in society, like, well, I don't want to admit that I have an eating disorder. I don't want to let my family know that I am struggling with not properly nourishing my body, because my friends, my family have all said like, oh my goodness, like you look so amazing, like what are you doing? And those things again are unhelpful statements, and we don't realize that. We don't realize somebody's internal struggles, what they're going through is that, oh no, like I would want someone to say that to me, but the reality is that you're, again, not in that same headspace as someone else. As well as, just the piece of the people, again, like the second highest mortality rate. If I'm not properly feeding myself, that creates other health issues. And so then the other health issues that come up, my heart has to work harder, my digestive tract is having difficult. So there's other pieces that come along with not properly nourishing ourselves, or, the other side of that, binge eating, where I am, again, health issues that come up with those things. So there's a lot of underlying health issues that sometimes providers and doctors don't realize, and they are saying, oh, well, you have this health issue, you just need to do this, or you have this health issue, you just need to do this. And there are other pieces that come along with it, which creates that piece of, again, undiagnosis, underdiagnosed, or the mistreatment, or the handling of a disordered eating or eating disorder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Dominic.
I just wanted to speak to, like, well, one, the like kind of the challenge in getting care, and then the effect of not getting care. I think, like, I know that I would like try to get help from, because I was in college trying to get help from my school, and they would send me to a place, and I would try to get care from this kind of center, like a rehab center, and they would determine whether or not I was sick enough to get care. And that was crazy to me. I'm like by myself, trying, like this young girl, like trying to get help. And the level of help that I needed, I felt like I was like severe, but based on the answers to my questions, not what it said on my chart, they would determine whether or not I could get help from them. And so now I'm on my own seeking care, trying to figure this out, when like Kiara says, I don't feel well. I'm not eating. I'm not nourished. So I don't have a lot of energy. There's only so much that I can do. And it was just really sad to like just have to kind of be out on my own, trying to figure out how to get help for myself. And the other thing is I would go to the doctor because I'm not feeling well, because I'm not nourishing myself. And they would try to treat the anxiety, not necessarily treating or sending me to a place to help with the issue, but they're trying to medically treat. I was trying to be medically treated for the anxiety. And I think that was a huge challenge, and it took me a long time to get the type of care that I needed, because I was felt like I was on the journey alone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can I jump in, Free?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead. And I do. Let me. I want you to jump in and answer this next question, so we can move this question forward too. So there is a research that showed that basically looked at music videos from BET, MTV, VH1 over a 6-week period. The researchers maintained in their research that not only do these videos not present a realistic picture of what all African American women look like, but they incorrectly and unfairly define ideals of beauty. I want to know, how do you guys feel like media contributes to body image and can lead to eating disorders? So Lisa, I do want you to jump in and not forget your point, but if you can also tie it into that as well.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think it's so important. And I want to point out that it's not, yes, this study looked at depictions of Black women, and it is not only Black women who are given this standard of what they should look like that can be one of the catalysts for an eating disorders. This is something that men, non-binary folks, anyone can experience. So absolutely, this whole cult of celebrity that we have in our country, and like Diamond shared, just not even celebrity, just looking on social media, comparing to your peers, can definitely get that ball rolling. Eating disorders are largely based in genetics. And what we like to say is that genetics kind of load the gun. Something happens in life to pull that trigger, whether that be a trauma, whether that be comparing yourself on social media. So absolutely, the music videos or just this whole cult of celebrity can definitely prolong or set off an eating disorder. But more importantly, like all of us keep saying, it's not just about the media. To me, the bigger problem is the medical community. First of all, we have a lack of representation of people of color as medical professionals. We need to do more systemically to make sure that more people of color are going to college, getting advanced degrees, and being represented in the folks that we're seeking treatment from. We also need our providers of all races to be culturally competent, so that when Diamond or anyone else walks into the doctor and says, hey, I think I have an eating disorder, they don't say stupid things like, oh, that's a white girl's disease, because they do say things like that. We also need culturally appropriate language. We need culturally appropriate dietitians. It's important in eating disorder recovery. Let me take a step back. Eating disorder recovery is not about abstinence. Substance use, for example, recovery is about abstinence, no longer using substances or alcohol. With eating disorders, it's different because you have to eat. So it's important that our eating disorder clinicians, our dietitians, understand different cultural differences and don't shame a Black client for eating cultural foods, that allow them to celebrate their culture. I mean, it's what's better than sitting around with your family and enjoying a great meal of your favorite foods. So I think we really need to look at that as well. The point that I wanted to make before, when Diamond was speaking, just really quick, for folks that aren't as familiar with eating disorders, think of eating disorders as the tip of the iceberg. The eating disorder behavior is what you see sticking out of the water, but underneath is all the stuff that's driving the eating disorder. Like Diamond said, the anxiety, the depression, the post-traumatic stress, personality disorders or other mental health issues. Substance use co-occurs about 50% of the time in folks that have eating disorders. So eating disorders rarely ride in the car alone. Normally there's other diagnoses that will go into that eating disorder as well. And oftentimes, some providers who aren't trained on eating disorders will say, oh, let's just treat the anxiety. Let's just treat the substance use. But if you don't get someone in a normative eating behavior, you're never going to be able to get them out of that eating disorder cycle. So to Diamond's point, if you're looking for accessible resources that are eating disorder specialized, please call the National Alliance. We have therapists who answer our phones who can help you navigate finding a clinician who is specialized in eating disorders and who's culturally competent and going to be affirming of your experiences.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for that. Diamond, what are the unseen pressures within the creative industry that affect body image and overall mental health?
Well, I think that like when I think about like pressures, I think there's a lot of like what we do behind the scenes is there's a lot of food involved, right? And like there's breakfast in the morning together,
Yeah.
there's lunch, and then we're eating together, and there's all of that. And I mean, I think that, you know, I know for me personally, there was a time period I had to bring my own food, and there was so much judgment around it, and it's so harmful because it's like I already when I and having an eating disorder, it's already hard for me to eat in front of folks, and 'cause I don't want to be judged, right? And so especially in recovery when it's just so challenging. So I think, but to answer your question, like I think that there's just a lot of like community around food, especially around building relationships. It's like, let's go to dinner, let's like go, let's go hang out, let's go drink. And all of that can be unhealthy for someone that's dealing with an eating disorder or even that's in recovery. I think that like pressure for looks and things like that, I haven't had to deal with that so much, but I can see how someone can, depending on the type of set that they are on, where physical appearance is very important and that can be challenging. But I think for me, just kind of trying to build relationships around food was very challenging.
I completely understand that. And I mean, too, we work in film, and I also work within the music side. There's just a consistent sense of like how you are presented, how you look, how the edits will come out, how the camera captured you, not being able to control that visual narrative of yourself. There's one thing to control your vocal narrative, but then there's also a visual narrative that gets turned over to the producers and that gets turned over to everyone else who's viewing. And so, you're not always able to control that aspect, and you have to trust the others who are watching it and putting it together. So I can completely understand and relate. Kiara, this is for you. Black teenagers are 50% more likely than white teenagers to exhibit bulimic behavior, such as binging and purging. How can we better recognize the warning signs of eating disorders in youth, and what support can we offer families?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, a lot of times when I talk to families about eating disorder behaviors, and in particular binging and purging with youth and just in general, being able to understand like, okay, one of the signs is if my child or if my friend is running off to the restroom right after we have a meal, that's a sign. If my friend or my child is saying things like, oh, like I need to go and work out after that meal I just had, or I need to do something to make what I just ate okay. Those are signs, those are warnings, those things that people are saying. But also the place of secrecy. So to Diamond's point, if someone is trying to constantly eat in secret, if someone is constantly trying to hide what they're eating, or not, having a meal at the dinner table with the family, those types of things. And oftentimes what I encourage people to do is like take the focus off the meal. Meals are uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable eating in front of people. So, take the focus off the meal. How can we not focus on what it is that we're eating? How can we just have a conversation at dinner about our day? How can we maybe play games at the table as a family where, you get to choose the game tonight that we do at the dinner table, have conversation cards, those types of things, so that there isn't just a conversation of, oh, oh, Lisa, I only see that you ate this much this evening. Like, no, that doesn't make Lisa feel better about her meal. Like, how do I say, oh, Lisa, like, what's going on? Like, what's, checking in with those emotions. How are you feeling right now? Is there something that I could be doing to help support you? Those types of things, to change the conversation. But also, taking the focus off of the body. Again, if we're talking about just pressures and from society, from school, from friends, like if I have a teenager who's struggling, like it's probably not going to be, I know that like so many times parents want to talk to their teenagers and they want their teenagers to talk to them, but pushing and kind of forcing that conversation about the body is not going to change the conversation. It's not going to change the way that person feels about themselves. So how do we ease into that conversation? How do we ease into, well, tell me what's going on for you? What do you think about your body? So many times I hear people say, well, my parents tell me that I'm just amazing, that I'm awesome, that my body's perfect. And they don't see that. And so sometimes it's that place of, okay, well, what would be more helpful for me to say to you? And often letting your kids know, or letting people know, like, I'm here to support you and I'm trying to help you out. And sometimes, we don't want support from people, and letting the people who we are trying to support know that, like, well, no support's not an option because I'm going to support you. And how do I continue to offer that support? So does that mean that we have a specific scheduled, again, check-in, or when we are having meals, do we do something to help distract you so that you're not so focused on it? If my kid is engaging in that, again, binging and purging place, let's sit at the table, let's watch a TV show after dinner together, so that that person isn't more likely to, go into straight to the bathroom or go straight to the exercising behaviors or whatever those things are, to try to burn that caloric intake that they just had.
For sure. Go ahead, Donna.
I just want to answer from a place of like having an eating disorder as a teenager. Like, I think what could have been helpful is like a safe place to have conversations about the way that I feel, whether it's the way that I feel about my body or just the way that I feel about what's going on at school. I think it's just so important to like have safe places to have conversations, because like I wouldn't think to have told my mom like, oh my gosh, like I feel this way about like the way I look. It just wasn't going to happen. But if it was just normal to just be able to have a conversations about emotions, about what's going on at school, about how kids are making me feel, but like the good and the bad, then I think that like I would have been more likely to be able to express like I'm having trouble with food, or I don't feel comfortable with, or I'm angry like with the way that I look, right? So I think, and whether or not it's with my family or with a therapist at that age, I do believe it's just important to be able to have conversations about emotions. And I will say, and I know in terms of like being able to identify if there's an eating disorder, I know for me it was weight loss. So like that was something that my mom noticed in me, and within a year I was able to get help for the first time. So I just wanted to speak from that place.
No, I appreciate that, and you being transparent about it. I know we will soon be asking for some questions from the audience if there's anyone who has any questions. So please feel free to start sending those. I do want to ask this really quickly. So I know that, for Black women, there's a certain thing about body image when it comes to being thicker or perceived as that being the right thing. We amplify and celebrate and kind of speak of that in a certain kind of way. So there's a misconception that Black women are not underneath the same guise or pressure to be thinner, or don't deal with the same challenges of white women around being thinner or maintaining a thinner body. What are your thoughts about that assumption and the impact that it has on Black women and minority groups? And how do you feel about racial disparities and cultural differences impacting those things that effect on women? So that's for.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. Like, I feel like like you said, sometimes it really isn't about just being thin, right? It's being able to maintain a certain shape. And for some body types, like being 100 pounds, that's not going to happen. But I do, just because of our genetics. And I do feel like it's harmful that it's ignored, that like anyone, despite how they look, whether they lean thinner or not, that they would be ignored from the conversation. But I do feel like it is a thing that, because you might not look thinner, that you might not be under the same pressure, or because you feel like, or because you have a certain shape, that you don't have a problem, that things are necessarily perfect. Like I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry, I don't even know if I've answered the question, but I just get so passionate because it's just so, it saddens me so much that there has been this sort of stereotype for what an eating disorder looks like.
For sure. And for the questions, so we can kind of jump into those if there are any questions from the audience. And of course, we want to just maintain a safe space for everyone to be able to express themselves, but also feel comfortable in what they are hearing and experiencing, because I understand that this is a sensitive topic. I want to just open the floor to that. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. But going forward, let's see. So we have one question. What advice would you provide to a partner of a person with an eating disorder to best support their partner's recovery? Is one that I see as well.
I can speak to that, or Lisa, Kiera, because
but I understand. I know that you have a partner, Diamond, so you can.
And I can speak to the recovery piece. I really think it's like emotional support as much as possible, because I know for me, like it's such a lonely space. It can feel so lonely. I mean, I went to groups, and those were great. But when I was not in a group, I was on my own, and it felt very lonely, very challenging. And so just to have a space where I can like express the challenges, where I can cry, just to make someone just feel comfortable with all of the range of emotions, because in recovery, we're learning a new way to think, and learning a new way to feel, and learning a new way to process emotions. And I feel like an entirely different person. So it's a vulnerable time period. It's a vulnerable transition period. And I think it's just important as a partner to be able to support your partner through all of those transitions, understanding that it is absolutely not easy for you or the person who is going through it.
Yeah. I would agree with what Diamond is saying, but also, in the piece that you said, I think is really important. One, the vulnerability piece, but then also too, like the fact that like they're learning something new, and you're constantly learning every day. And I think that what happens is that, kind of to what Lisa was saying earlier, it's this expectation. A lot of times when we hear the word recovery, that like, oh, a person doesn't struggle with that anymore. Like they're done. They, it's good. Like they're fine. And the reality is that, again, it's a struggle every day, because my thoughts are still here. My behaviors may have changed. My behaviors are different. I don't respond in the same way, but my thoughts are still here. I still battle these thoughts. And so it's about being able to understand, one, how do you go to your partner for support, and asking them, okay, what can I do to support you with meals, with those emotions, with those different things? Like talking to your partner is so important, and having those conversations, having that communication, but then also, making sure you get support. How are you plugging into therapy groups or support groups? How are you plugging into your own therapist or whatever those things are? Because it is hard. It's hard to deal with someone that you love and support, and trying to help them, and they're going through their struggles. That creates emotions in you. You're still human, and so many times it's this feeling of, okay, my partner, my person is struggling, so I have to be strong for them. And the reality is that they're probably going to say things that are hurtful. They're going to do things that are hurtful. And we have to make sure that, as a partner, as a person, like you are also taking care of yourself. Yeah.
And one thing I know that what our clinical director, Dr. Hendelman, always says is put on your oxygen mask first. Just like you hear on the airlines, you have to help yourself first. So if your loved one, whether that's a child or a spouse or a partner, is going through an eating disorder, please get yourself help, because an eating disorder really takes over that whole family unit, and it can really just get pervasive throughout everyone in the family. So I encourage you to join the Alliance. We have free therapist-led support groups specifically for loved ones on Wednesday evenings. We also have various Facebook groups for moms, for dads, for partners, and we do different Instagram Live. So I would definitely recommend checking us out. We also had a post, I believe it was yesterday, on Instagram about how to talk to a loved one if you think they're experiencing an eating disorder, using lots of I statements, expressing your concern in a compassionate way, not making it about their body shape and size. So there's definitely some tips that you can find through the National Alliance for Eating Disorders.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Kira, we have a question. Are Black men experiencing eating disorders?
So that is a great question. And kind of going to, a little bit of what we talked about earlier and why we're having this conversation is that, unfortunately, we are looking for the research in that. Do they experience eating disorders? Absolutely. Again, eating disorders don't discriminate for socioeconomic status, race. They don't discriminate against age. They don't discriminate against, sexuality, any of those things. So are Black men experiencing these things? Yes. Do we have the research to know what those statistics are? Unfortunately, we don't have that right now because we're still doing the research. We're still looking for what that looks like in, again, the Black community. Not only for women, we know that, only 8% of Black women receive eating disorder treatment compared to 22% of white women. So if we only know that 8% of Black women receive treatment, then there's probably a higher percentage of Black women who experience eating disorders. And then there's a percentage there of Black men who experience it, who then aren't being treated, and then who also aren't being diagnosed with that because of the underdiagnosis piece, because of the, again, the harmful things that providers say to people.
And so we have another question too, to this point, okay, that there's a culture of people, Black women and women in general, running to get a lot of surgical procedures to impact their bodies. There's multiple surgeries to lose weight as well, and to create a certain aesthetic and figure and things of that nature. Does this fall under the spectrum of an eating disorder, or to some degree, or what would it be considered if not, or if to that is the question for you, Kiera?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. And that's a piece of, again, the research that we're trying to figure out, because what happens is that eating disorders aren't primarily only focused on body image, but body image is something that we take into consideration when it comes to eating disorders. And when it comes to those, cosmetic surgeries or those types of things, something that I often ask people is, well, what is your relationship with food? What does that look like? Are you, again, having that fear of gaining weight? What do you think about your body? Do you feel like you won't be good enough until you get to a certain, size, or until you look a certain way? And so if that's the case, then the reality is that we focus on the thoughts. We focus on how do we change those thoughts, because oftentimes I think what happens is that there, again, is this image, this ideal that's, okay, well, when I look like that, then I'll be accepted. When I look like that, then other people will want to talk to me or be with me. And it's about how do we become comfortable and confident in where we are, in that place of body acceptance, which is really hard, again, across the spectrum, because we're not taught to accept our bodies. We're taught that we should change. We're taught that we should look different. And so because of that, is it a part of eating disorders? it really is a individualized type of conversation because it's different for every person. Can it be a part of an eating disorder? Yes, it can.
What?
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead,
I was gonna say there's something that I feel like I learned in my recovery was like body dysmorphic disorder, right? Like, isn't that something that, like, Kiera, Lisa, would you say that that's related to eating disorder? Like,
So that's a good question. It can be, but according to the what we call the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, the thing that we look at when it comes to diagnosing individuals and people, body dysmorphia and eating disorders can be comorbid. So basically they can go together, but they're not the same thing. And body dysmorphic disorder actually falls into like obsessive compulsive disorders and those types of things, and not necessarily the eating disorder categorization. Can they be, again, comorbid? They're the connection, the same thing. They're different. And it's that place of, again, a lot of times with body dysmorphic disorder, it's the distorted perception of the body or a particular body type, and that becomes the focus. And then again, what happens is once that thing is changed, sometimes what we see is that, oh, then my focus is now on this part of my body instead of this part of my body, or it's on the entire body. And so it kind of changes, and it's not necessarily always about weight with body dysmorphic disorder.
This is a phenomenal conversation. We have about 10 more minutes, so I do want to get one more question in. And there's so many questions, so this just goes to show that Silence to Shame definitely has to extend this conversation further to to a larger platform to accommodate a larger and wider conversation around this. Are there any eating disorder groups or literature focused on eating disorders in older adult aging populations? That was a bit of a tongue twister. So for older adults and aging adults, is there any literature focused there or any groups of support? Because as people are aging and their bodies are changing and youth is amplified, there's things that people do deal with as they go through those aging changes. Are you aware of any resources that might be able to be provided for that?
You want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm so glad to see the questions that are being asked in the chat. They're just amazing. But yes, there are some smaller groups that are offered for what they call either women in midlife or older folks. At the Alliance, all of our groups are 18 and older, and they are age inclusive. We have folks as young as 18 all the way up through 97 years old that attend our support groups. And if someone is looking for more specific groups for that population, please give the Alliance a call or send us an email. We're happy to connect you with resources. And just bouncing, there's a lot of questions about how do eating disorders affect different communities. Eating disorders can affect any community, as Kiera said. They definitely are pervasive within the Black community, but the studies aren't there. And to answer one of the questions in the chat, because the studies aren't there, we also don't know how many deaths are accounted for within the Black community due to eating disorders. Overall, like Free shared, we know that about every 52 minutes, someone in the United States dies as a direct result of their eating disorder. Those are the ones that we know about. How many eating disorder deaths are chalked up to suicide, are chalked up to heart failure, are chalked up to something else, to alcoholism or substance use, when really there was an eating disorder that was co-occurring there. So we know that all of these statistics that we have are very underreported. And we know that, unfortunately, currently, most studies that we have on eating disorders, Black folks, Indigenous folks only account for about 2.5% of study participants. So it's something that all of our communities need to do better about, is having more representation and coming to the table and saying, hey, this is a topic we need to talk about.
Beautiful. First and foremost, before we close out or I turn it over, I just want to thank you guys for this conversation, because this has been a really good conversation. Diamond specifically, thank you for coming and sharing your experience, and then always being present when I call your phone and ask for something. So I appreciate you giving me this kind of yes especially with this level of topic and the bravery that it takes to have this kind of conversation. So Diamond, thank you very, very much. To Lisa and Kiera, thank you for having this conversation and just joining us this evening to discuss it. It's been a really large and wide conversation. Again, as I said earlier, just with all of the questions pouring in and there being questions that we didn't even get to, just goes to show that we have to have a larger and wider scale conversation around this, because it does obviously have its impacts, and to be a part of that research and community to make a change and difference, we have to be able and willing to discuss it. So I will pass it over to Megan. Again, my name is Free the Vision. And I appreciate you guys for taking the time to have this conversation with me, and you guys bringing me in on this and all that we've learned.
Yes, thank you so much, Free, for leading us in this conversation tonight and being our moderator and just being a really amazing asset to the Silence the Shame team. So we definitely thank you and are grateful for you. To all our panelists, Lisa, Kiera, Diamond, thank you so much for sharing this evening with us and just sharing your knowledge, your input, your experiences. This was such a dynamic and robust conversation. And just as we reiterated, there were lots of amazing questions. We apologize for not being able to get to everyone's questions just so we can respect everyone's time this Tuesday evening. However, it is to say that this is a conversation that we need to have a lot more. And so making sure that us at Silence the Shame is being able to offer these safe spaces to do so, we will absolutely, create these spaces to have more of these conversations. To that point, each month you can see more community conversations from Silence the Shame. So if you're not doing so already, definitely connect with us, either our newsletter or social media. Get your family, your network, your friends, your coworkers connected as well, because we all need to be a part of these conversations, just as we're a part of each other's lives. So just a few things. Again, just thank you to our panelists. Just want to take time to definitely commend you all and to applaud you for tonight. To all of those who are listening, tuning in, watching via Zoom or Facebook Live, just letting you know you can connect with us. Please feel free to visit us at www.silencetheshame.com. We will also get you connected to the National Alliance of Eating Disorders. If you registered for today's event, we will email you with a follow-up, and we will provide many resources for you to connect with them, connect with us, and connect with other community supports and services. And one last thing, because we are a nonprofit and we are just trying to make sure that we are doing our due diligence and putting out our efforts to the community, we would appreciate if you just took the time out to complete our post survey. It will actually come up on your computer right as you are exiting out this Zoom webinar. So please feel free to take a few minutes and to complete that post survey. We just want to make sure that we are doing the best that we can for our community. So I will stop talking now and I will turn this evening over to you all, and just again, thank you for this gracious and this lovely conversation. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank
All
you.
right. Till next time, thank you.